to protect themselves from the things that can go wrong.
I want to ask you in a minute about the iPad and the Amazon, the Kindle Fire, and things like that. But what's this story where Apple won a patent right against HTC and Android?
Yeah, I mean,
what is that?
If you get me started on patents, George, I mean, it's going to take 5 hours here.
Okay.
What's happened is that the patent system in this country in particular has gone completely wacko. And ever since the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the U.S. PTO, started allowing business method patents and patents on basic practices and processes and software systems and such, all kinds of obvious things have been patented. Now the classic example, this isn't really a high-tech one, but the classic example is that there is actually a patent on the process of using a laser pointer to play with your cat. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like, something from a parody or something like that. It's true. You can look it up. I don't have the patent number right here, but it's there. It shows, the cat, a pointer, and the whole thing. That's patented. That was approved.
That's crazy.
So what we have now, the problem we have now in technology is that there are so many patents on so many basic processes using one click to do something, seeing a link and using it to connect to this kind of site. So if you take a modern product like a smartphone, whether it's an iPhone or an Android phone, whatever, there are tens of thousands, if not more, individual patents that encumber that product. And so what you have is these wars between all these different companies that are trying to essentially squeeze money out of each other on one hand, or trying to get patents protectively to protect themselves from having people trying to squeeze money out of them. And I have charts that show all the different companies with different colored lines pointing at how they're trying to sue each other, and it's just like a colored blob. So this is what you're hearing now about this latest Apple patent is just another chapter in that. Basically, Microsoft is trying to find a way to squeeze. Microsoft is having problems, right?
That's right.
It was just announced today that they're not going to be doing a keynote at the CES, which they've typically done, and there's a lot of arguing. Where they pull out, where they kicked out. It's not clear yet. But they have their Windows Phone, and compared with the iPhone and with Android, it's really not doing very well at this point. So what they're trying to do, what Microsoft is trying to do, is find a way to get money out of the more successful phones. And one of the ways they're doing that is patent wars, especially against Android now, because there's no love lost between Microsoft and Google at this point. And so this is one of those patents. It's one of these patents where Microsoft is saying, we want a certain amount of money for every Android phone that's sold. Now, the really interesting thing about this particular patent is in Europe, the European regulators declared you couldn't even have the patent there because they declared it was an obvious thing. It was too obvious to be patented. But here in the U.S., hey, you can do a laser pointer with a cat, so you can pretty much patent anything.
That is amazing. iPad. Apple iPads versus the Kindle Fire, or what else is out there? Do you like them?
Tablets are in their early phases right now. And the iPad is an amazing device. I always get concerned with devices like that when you're always going to feel 6 months down the line that you probably should have held off for another 6 months. Now, obviously you could take that forever. You got to at some point stop and buy the thing. But Apple runs a very closed shop, a very closed ecosystem. So once you buy your way into Apple, whether it's iPhone or iPad or any other similar devices that Apple controls, you're going to be kind of locked into that system. The reason I prefer myself the more open environments, whether it's Android operating system or something else, is because normally they're not as controlled. But there's no way getting around the fact that Apple has a tremendous lead in the tablet area. And just the fact that it's an iPad carries a lot of weight for buyers. So, the Kindle has come out now. That it has to be clearly one of the least expensive, I guess, really the least expensive full-featured Android tablet. The reports on it are kind of mixed right now. There's some issues about the speed. Of course, it's locked to Amazon in some significant ways. Not that you can't unlock it with you know how to do it. There was a update that just came out, and there's conflicting reports about how that really improved things. I think the marketplace is still trying to find the right place for tablets in general, and not just the fact whether or not you have a tablet, but the size. Is it better to have a big tablet? Is it better to have a 7-inch tablet? How that's going to shake out, we just don't know yet. But tablets are in our future. That's for sure.
What's new in terms of technology that just knocks your socks off, Lauren? Anything?
Well, there's always there's always new things happening. I think what we're going to be seeing in the next year, for example, that's going to be extraordinary is this continuing march of acceleration of the power of smartphones in particular. We're going to be seeing quad-core smartphones commonly, and quad-core other devices also. And that just means a lot more power, a lot more processing power. I think there's going to be battery improvements. There really have to be. That's a really important area right now. But the things that we're going to be able to do with these more powerful portable devices, in conjunction with higher speed wireless networks, with the LTE networks and the other fourth generation wireless networks, are just beyond really what we can imagine right now, because we just haven't ever experienced that kind of power in something you can hold in your hand. So I think, in general, wireless and portable devices are going to be just a spectacular area of change that we're going to see in this coming year.
And Lauren, you're right about the batteries. If you don't have a real heavy-duty battery in your smartphone, that thing eats up the power fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, some of the really interesting areas of research now in technology are trying to find ways to reduce the parts of to reduce the power consumption for the parts of cell phones that tend to draw the most power, and one of those is usually the display, the backlight and the display. The backlight's a real power hungry thing, so they're trying to find ways, and they have these now. These haven't really hit the market yet. More displays that are more. Have you seen? The normal Kindles have the e-ink displays.
Okay.
Right, they have those monochrome.
Yeah, I haven't used it, but
yeah, and those are a completely different kind of technology from LCD, because when they're fixed in position, when they're not changing, they're not really pulling any power to speak of. So they're trying to find ways to get that kind of power sipping technology, or displays that don't need backlights, like those black and white Kindles, but that could display full color, full motion, all those kinds of things. And that's coming. There's some that are flexible too. So you could theoretically take your smartphone, well, at least the display, and roll it up. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that.
I've got a charger in my office studio, a charger in my home, a charger in my car, a portable charger I take when I'm on traveling, and then I've got a little battery-powered charger that you can use for like an hour's worth of phone time that you just plug into the phone, so it's always ready. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's something. That's a real good thing to have too. I think I have one of those the same thing you're talking about. It's actually a little external battery, and you turn it on
and just plug it in,
and
plug it
into
the
phone, and it provides external power. So I always keep one of those around. But this is something that has to be solved. We're increasing. When we go to quad core phones, that's going to pull more power because you've got 4 cores to power instead of just 1 or 2. Basically, we're still waiting for those nuclear batteries, right?
I noticed the battery was made in China. Everything is made in China. Don't we even make them here?
I don't think so. We've basically, sold our manufacturing soul to China. We did it willingly. They didn't come here and take it from us. We basically said, okay, you do it, and we'll do everything else. And it's not quite clear what that everything else is anymore, is it?
Motorola, phones made in China, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
or wherever.
There's the whole. We do not have a manufacturing sector in this country anymore to speak of.
No, not really.
And it's this way all across the board, and it's hard to see how to ever get it back. People say, "Oh, we want to bring manufacturing back to the U.S.," but to do that, you have to have the whole infrastructure. You have to have the supply chains and all the different things. And all of that is overseas now, too.
Yeah, the equipment's gone. The robotics, it's all gone. Everything's gone.
The tooling, the machine tooling equipment, and the skills you need to run them, all of that is gone now.
And the labor. You got to get the labor down. And how's that going to happen?
I don't see how we can get manufacturing back now. I think that it's just, you wish you could do it, and you say, geez, there must be some way to do this, but I think that may be energy poorly spent now, because so much is necessary in order to do that, and we can't compete on a wage basis with those countries. So I think that's sort of a dream, but I don't see how we can accomplish it.
And what kind of a deal do you get? I mean, if you had a comparable product made in the United States and one made in China, what's the price difference? Is it ridiculously high here with U.S. labor?
You mean if you could build it here? If you could do it here. Yeah, it would be very much higher. Plus, it gets complicated because you have the currency relationships. It's not just a matter of what the raw material is and having the machinery to build it. I mean, remember, if you think about a piece of technology, here's a really good example. There were floods in Thailand recently. The flooding in Thailand caused the price of disk drives worldwide, especially here in the U.S., to peak up 150, 200% practically overnight.
Wow.
Because the manufacturing base for making those disk drives, these are, U.S. companies in name at least, but all their manufacturing facilities are over there, and the flooding caused all their plants to shut down. But those plants cost enormous amounts of money to build, and who wants to invest enormous amounts of money in anything here anymore? See, that's the other problem. You've got to get the cooperation of the banks and the people that control the financial parts of the country. And if you can't get the financing, you can't build the factories. And we haven't been very good at long-term planning. It's all been short-term profit. This is how we've shot ourselves in the foot in so many ways.
Well, that's true. That is true too. Study came out that said that people are more likely to die. They had a headline problem, to die while texting. Do you believe that?
You mean,
or maybe it means lie. They've screwed up this article here. But it says people are more likely to lie by texting people as opposed to face-to-face.
Sure.
Of course, they're also more likely to die if they're texting while they're driving.
Right,
that's right.
Yeah, right.
So it's right on both fronts.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. I think it's in terms of lying, certainly. We've seen this for years with email. When I started using email about 1,000 years ago, at least it feels that way, it became obvious immediately that sort of the farther you are from somebody in terms of technology in a lot of ways, the less you think of them as a real person, and the more you think of them as someone you can lie to and manipulate and be dishonest with. So texting, because it tends to be little short messages, is probably the worst. Email, because it's all just written, is a little bit better, but still bad. A phone call is even better in terms of your honesty, because at least you get the emotional cues, you get the inflections, and you get all of that. And of course, when you're right with a person, then you get the whole thing. You get the inflections and the body language and the whole shebang. So I think it's true, and this is something people have to realize, because if you treat email and texting and such as if it's the same as being in the same room with someone or even being on the phone with them, you're liable to have misunderstandings. You can misunderstand sarcasm very easily. I mean, there have been what we call flame wars over that on the Internet for decades. And I think a lot of people are still relatively new to these technologies. A lot of young people use texting, and they haven't necessarily been at this long enough to understand all the nuances. So this is a real issue. It's where technology meets psychology and sociology and all these other things, and we don't necessarily take the time to teach any of this to children or anyone else, so we shouldn't be surprised when there are problems.
I've been watching some advertisements for video games. These things are unbelievable since my day, Lorne. I mean, unbelievable. Of course, since my day, They played Pong.
Yeah, well, I couldn't even master Pong. I mean, that's the...
But I mean, they're so lifelike.
And I think that's really we haven't really scratched the surface of that yet. I think that what was it I saw? Yes, there was an article within the last couple of days about work that's being done on simulating the singing voices of celebrities. Okay.
That's great.
And you remember there was a movie back maybe in the 80s called Looker? It was James Coburn and some other folks, but the concept was that there were people that were scanning using computer technology. This was a Michael Crichton concept, I think. I think he wrote it. And they were scanning models, fashion models and other people.
Right.
And they would use the computers to generate commercials and other features that involved them, but they were completely simulated. And, of course, they'd kill the models, once they had them scanned to get them out of the way, and you wouldn't have to pay them anymore, right? I think we're heading toward a period here where in video games and in other kinds of broadcast media and all kinds of other technologies, we're going to see a time when it's going to be very difficult to necessarily know whether the voice you're hearing or the image you're seeing is the real person, or if we're, for example, we might be listening to a computer-generated George.
I did that once during a little spoof, and it almost worked. Hold on, we're coming back for phone calls as we talk about technology and the Internet with Lauren Weinstein right here on Coast to Coast AM. Next hour will be our third guest who's behind the secret door. When we come back in a moment with Lauren Weinstein, we're going to take your phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. Lauren, has technology sometimes gone too far? I mean, I remember the days, when we had just little pagers. We didn't even have cell phones to call people back with. Remember those days?
Yeah, I had one of those for a long time.
Yeah.
I think that question has probably been asked starting in one way or another with grunts in the cave and going forward all through history. I think at every step along the way, they've said, has technology gone too far? Look at these windmills. Look at these water clocks. No one's, you're doing it the way they used to. So I guess the answer is probably always the same, unless you want to use techniques like global thermonuclear war to stop technology, which would have side effects of killing us all.
Sure.
Technology is going to advance. That's part of human nature and part of, I think, what's fundamentally human. The question is, do we manage it properly? Do we treat it in ways that respect humanity and respect the earth and respect animals and all these other things? Do we rule the technology, or do we allow the technology to rule us? I think that's really the fundamental question.
Well, that's a good point. I happen to like technology. I think it's done marvelous things for us. It has made things convenient for us. I see primarily all upside.
I was talking to someone a couple of days ago about the fact, as you get older, you start to forget things, right? I mean, this is just the nature of aging. And to have a little device clipped on your belt or in your pocket that, your smartphone, that you can just pick up at any time and type a question or speak a question, just, some fact that you've forgotten for the moment, a name, an address, a phone number, and to have that information instantly available, I think that's a pretty amazing thing. I think that's going to be a liberating thing for us as we age, because it's almost like reaching into a giant global brain to fill in those gaps that our own brain develops over time. I think that's a marvelous way that technology improves our lives.
I think so, too. Let's go to some of the phone calls. Lindsay, Ontario, we go. Hey, Brent, go ahead. Good to have you with us.
Hi, hey, George. How's it going?
Good.
I was just wanted to ask pretty much about the Bob Lazar story. I know a lot of people think that he's a phony and that he's a big liar, but I personally believe that he's telling the truth. But I was just
okay. Well, that's going to be an open line call right now. We've got Lauren Weinstein on talking about technology. Ian in Toronto, Canada. Go ahead, Ian.
Thank you, George. My question is, does our research in motion have a chance with catching up the Apple phones, because 2.5 years ago we were sitting on top of the world in Canada with our beloved Research in Motion.
Yeah, and in fact, it was just announced that the next generation of RIM devices are I guess, going to be delayed until probably the end of next year.
Oh my gosh!
So I the financial side of this is not where I have my expertise, but it looks to me like the days of BlackBerry and RIM may have passed by here. I think there were some strategic decisions that were perhaps not optimally made, and it sure looks like iPhone and Android in particular are going to really take over that niche that at one point was RIM. So I mean, that's not to say that they may have some magic rabbit they can pull out of their hat. You really never know. But based on what you can see right now, it doesn't look too encouraging for them.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to know.
Thank you.
Yeah, what is going on with the BlackBerry Maker RIM? What's happening?
Well, they were slow. I think that's a major part of it. They were slow to recognize the changes that were occurring and the rise of real smartphones. The same thing could be said of Nokia. And it seems like the only thing that's keeping Nokia going now is their very tight new relationship with Microsoft. Otherwise, they'd probably be going down completely. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it, because it wasn't that many years ago when Nokia was like top of the heap. I had a Nokia phone. But this industry changes so fast that if you can't stay agile and change with it, it's not that you're necessarily making horrible errors in what you're doing, but you're not changing and evolving fast enough. And that's, I think, where it is with RIM now. It's pretty amazing when you think that it was just a couple of years ago when it was BlackBerry.
Yeah, that's true. Let's go to Warner Robins, Georgia. It's Tiberius with us on Coast to Coast. Hey, Ty, go ahead.
Hello. Good morning, George Norrie.
Morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good. Good morning, Mr. Price.
Good morning.
I got a question for you, and I wanted to know, the government had issued out some cell phones, and I had noticed it was just with the people that really doesn't have cell phones, because of people that has the government issued phones like insurance or whatnot. This is usually the ones that don't usually have a cell phone. And see, what I was hearing is because is it possible that these cell phones has a tracking device in it? Because I'm a Christian. I'm into end time prophecies and stuff, and as far as what's been happening now, is it a possibility that a lot of the technology that they're coming out with and that they're creating, could it be also a downfall for mankind in the future? Because it seems like a lot of things is leading up to the Antichrist system. George, I wanted to ask a general question for you, George, if you don't mind.
I tell you what, let's just get Lauren to answer this first and get his reaction, and then I'll come back to you, Ty. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this kind of leads back to what I was saying a few minutes ago about technology. Who rules it? Is the technology ruling us, or are we ruling it? The kinds of technology that are in modern cell phones now that it can involve location tracking, for example, can be used in different ways. It can be used to help you find where you're going. I mean, every cell phone is a map of the world, essentially, a driving map of the world. It can be used in various social contexts to meet up with people. It could also be used in negative ways if the data is not properly protected and not properly kept in the context of the particular service that you're supposed to be using. In other words, there's nothing inherently wrong or evil or bad about, for example, location data. The question is, what do you do with it? Do you handle it properly? Do you protect it? What do you do when, for example, the government comes along and asks for it? So it's not just a question of technology. It's a question of what your rules are. Do you trust the organizations that are handling the data? Do you trust the government to not make unreasonable requests? Blaming the technology is almost always a mistake in these kinds of situations. It's like that old Pogo cartoon, we have met the enemy and he is us. The technology is a tool. It's like a hammer or a knife. And a hammer can be used to build things, and a knife can be used to survive in the wilderness, but of course you could also smash a skull with a hammer or slit someone's throat with a knife. So the technology is not where we need to be concerned. We need to be making sure that we use the technology and the data that the technology generates in responsible ways. And if we do that, that data can bring us great benefits, or it can cause great problems. That choice is ours.
All right, let's go back to Tiberius real quickly. Ty, what's your question for me?
Okay. The next question, and like I said, I'll just listen over the air. Like I said, I'm over here in the East Coast, Georgia, the Southern Hemisphere, and I'm a stargazer. And I've noticed here lately, we're actually beginning in 2010, I noticed there are new low-level bright stars in the sky. And I was wondering, are these stars? Because then in our hemisphere, there is a big, gigantic question mark. And from listening over the internet, I wanted to know, did these have anything to do with these comets and asteroids that's coming through the atmosphere?
Well,
because like I said, I'm over here in the East Coast.
Let me tell you, I'm not sure. I mean, that's a good question to ask someone like a Dr. Sky. I would doubt it, but I can't say no positively about that. Let's go next to Eugene, Oregon. Michael's turn on Coast to Coast. Go ahead, Michael.
Interesting subject. I wanted to bring up a Outer Limits episode I saw. It's one of the new versions of the Outer Limits. It's called The Stream. And what it is it's a scenario where everyone is hooked up to the internet neurally, to where they have these little devices that are hooked onto their temples. And it's nobody has to read anymore, or all they do is, they're connected to the internet neurally, like a neural internet connection. And I was wondering, are we ever going to get to that point? Because they have technology now to where they can plug something into somebody's brain, and they can actually see, somebody that's blind can actually see, images or shadows in a certain sense, I mean, how soon before we get to that point to where...
I think that's sooner than later, Lauren, don't you?
This is a really fascinating area, and it's advancing much faster than I think a lot of people would have anticipated. This is the whole area of brain-machine interface, neural interfaces. And there are some really spectacular advances being made. And as the caller just said, there is work now on essentially artificial vision, where the brain is stimulated directly through a matrix of electrodes to present imagery. It takes training. It can only work in certain situations, but that's still a pretty amazing thing. There's something else that I saw recently that was really quite remarkable too, which is work that's being done to actually be able to, in a tricky kind of way. It's hard to explain, but what it boils down to is being able to see some of the imagery that a person sees. In other words, you can, through MRI techniques, advanced MRI techniques, if you process all the data properly, you're actually able to interpret on a screen some of what someone is viewing themselves. It's not mind reading per se, but it means that we're learning a lot more about how the brain works, how it's wired, how it functions. I think that the day will come sooner than we would have thought, when direct interfaces for some of this data will be possible. Will it be in our lifetime? I don't know. That seems kind of difficult. But I think it will come. If you just follow the timeline of advances in terms of neural research, the time when you may be able to actually plug in a direct neural interface instead of having to view it on a screen, I think that's a completely reasonable possibility.
Let's go to Providence, Rhode Island. Hey, Gunnar, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Morning, gentlemen. Hey, in the 1980s, I was working for CompUSA, and I saw a video produced by Bill Gates and Steven Spielberg about what they projected technology would be like in the next 20 years. And one of those cool things was an integrated flat screen monitor in the dashboard of the vehicles. And I'm thinking with the advent of the iPad, how soon do you think car manufacturers will smarten up and integrate that into their next product line?
Well, there actually are, there actually are flat screen displays in some cars now that are being used for the navigation systems and control systems. You could basically feed those any data you wanted. There were Android-based systems that run in cars now. I think the bigger problem is going to be the legal structure around what data you can display without distracting people in a way that would be considered dangerous for driving, because you don't necessarily want people doing more fiddling around with a screen in their dashboard if they're the driver. But that's pretty much here now, actually.
Well, let's go to Duarte, California. Scott, it's your turn on Coast to Coast. Hi, Scott.
Hi there. This is fantastic. Fantastic guest, and
it sure is.
I am so interested in this. I had touched on before I just been on your show as far as explaining that I had been clinically dead approximately 4 times now, and during that period I was exposed to what I would call all knowledge of the universe, and since then, I had applied for a patent on on 2 things, and one is a computer that would actually have thought, that would actually think for itself using, put it this way, all the knowledge that's out there on the internet. And
are they almost doing that now, Lauren?
There's certainly a lot of work done on gathering as much information as you can from the public internet and making intelligent analysis of that data. That's not the same as being self-aware, of course. We don't think. But then again, what is self-aware, right? What is consciousness? When you cross that dividing line, it may not necessarily be obvious from the outside. But yeah, there's a lot of work going on right now to not just gather pages, for example, and do search on them, which is itself an enormously complex task, but to actually analyze the data and draw conclusions from that data and new information from that. I think that's still in fairly early stages, but again, with the kinds of increases in computational capability we have now, things that were unimaginable just a few years ago are becoming very, very practical. So that's another area where there's going to be just unbelievable evolution quickly.
Well, let's go to Jason, Madison, Wisconsin, final caller. Go ahead, Jason.
Guys, another great show tonight. Thank you so much. Since the beginning of mankind, we've always been able to develop technology. I guess my question is, and I want to hear your opinions, will humans devolve, so to speak, if we can no longer develop innovative, cutting-edge technology?
Will we still evolve? Yeah.
I think so,
too. We would still evolve. We would evolve in different directions. But then again, you could say that a stone knife is technology at a certain time. And I think we would find other kinds of technologies to develop if we did not have the capability, for example, to work with the highly advanced electronics that we have. Not if there was an EMP burst and everything, was burned out or something, we would still find technology to develop.
We sure would. Lauren, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being on the program.
Thank you so much, George. And again, have a happy holiday, Merry Christmas, all the best for the new year to you and to all the listeners and the whole gang at Coast.
Absolutely. Up next, we will find out who's behind door number 3. Another secret door guest right here on Coast to Coast AM. Plus, I'll tell you what's in store on our next program as well. So we shall be right back in seconds. So don't touch your dial. Lauren Weinstein, our special guest. So I've guessed 2 of them now. Let's see if I can go 3 for 3. We'll be back. Okay, here's our final hour, and it's our final guest behind the secret door. So we'll be opening up that door in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, welcome back to Coast to Coast. Okay, here we are. It's our third guest behind the secret door. Let's open the door. Come on in. How are you? All right.
The force is strong with you, young Nuri, but you are not a Jedi yet.
John Hogue.
That was easy.
That was a simple one of the night. You have this certain resonance to your voice, John, and you can't hide it.
Yeah, I had a plan tonight to mask that opera profunda sound, but my helium balloon popped on the way up to my home.
Now, had you just did the breathing, I never would have guessed.
Yeah, well, the other one was the duck, but that probably wouldn't have worked. So
that's great. How are you, John? What's new?
Well, I am finishing a 36 hours up, finishing my 19th book, which is predictions for 2012.
Good for you.
Yeah, so it's been a very long day.
Well, let me tell you, one of the things you have predicted was that President Barack Obama would win re-election. And you know what? As of this point right now, and we're not talking the politics of his performance, but as of this time, I would agree with you. I think right now he probably will get reelected.
Yeah, it seems, we made that observation on your show way back in early January of 2009, and when the Obama administration was relatively new. And I made that statement because, as I've said before on the show, I've been making presidential predictions since 1968, and I'm 11-0 in predicting the popular vote victor of the presidency. It was interesting about that is here we are in the 12th round in the year 2012 is about to happen. So I still say that Barack Obama will be president of the United States. Back then, when I said it, though, there was quite a controversy. A lot of people were quite upset.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
Well, it's an interesting thing when you deal with prophecy in politics. You're always going to find one group or the other not very happy with what you have to say. I mean, but it doesn't necessarily mean whether it's right or wrong. It's not necessarily your view of whoever the candidate is. You're just saying this is my prediction. Well, to all the people on the left, I predicted Nixon and Reagan and other people, and George Bush winning to upset them, and then said the same about Clinton and Democrats winning, which upset the other side. And you kind of in the future business, you kind of gain an appreciation why a prophet like Nostradamus back in the 16th century decided to obscure and codify his work, because as he used to say, you will always upset the cherished delicacies and sympathies of the people who expect their future to look the way they wish it should be projected. And the thing that's important about that is, and there's one of the things that I've addressed in this new book, Predictions for 2012, that I'll be posting soon online. The whole opening is about how I argue that that all this anticipation of 2012, it has less to do with what the Mayans, who some people believe the winter solstice, actually a year from now,
that's right,
is supposed to end the great 5,000-year era since creation, as the Maya see the world. And some people believe it's going to either be the end of the world or the end of the world as we know it. But I make the argument that actually the connection between the Maya and the year 2012 is quite projected, but that doesn't mean that we haven't made 2012 significant in our lives. I mean, when you look at all the things that are coming up for a deadline to either be dumped or renewed, like the Kyoto protocols for global warming, it runs out at the end of 2012. There's a number of government agencies that run out in 2012, their support. There is the election coming. We are making, and that's part of what makes prophecy interesting. It's not just about seeing the future. There's something of a propaganda also in prophecy, or what I like to call propaganda, that people try to make a future, or they try to change a future from happening, like a lot of people did during the Y2K experience, which I go into in depth because I was one of the voices out there in the 1990s that, when it wasn't so popular to talk about it, was saying, hey, we've got this problem with the computers switching up years to the years 00, because that means in computer language a mixed message that, should I go to a new century or should I shut down?
Exactly.
So,
and that was a real possibility.
Yeah, it was. I went and researched it, and there were a number of things that happened, despite the fact that in the last 5 years or so, people began to take it seriously and make the simple, though very busy job of going through every computer and switching over. Of course, I felt rather satisfied and a bit smug because I've been an Apple user all my life, and Steve Jobs had already anticipated that issue. But since most of the world was on PC, it was not anticipated because we never thought about a century ending in zeros, or we just grew up with 19 being next to every year, and then it became 20. So, but that was an example of what I cite as I think maybe even just recently there was a rerun of one of my shows I did with Art back in early 2000 where we talked about this, I think just a few days ago.
Yeah, one of our Somewhere in Times, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the first time, I think it was the 4th of January, 2000, 4 days after the turn of the century, where I basically declared that this is a prophetic success story. The Y2K bug is just the kind of prophecy that I like to see happen and be involved with. And it's what I call in the book, that kind of a fictional story about some 16th century village idiot who's rocking and rolling back and forth on the rail of a fence and foams at the mouth suddenly and falls over, and everybody in the village gathers around, and he makes this very persuasive argument in his prophetic scotoma experience that you've got to do this, this, and that, or else something terrible is going to happen to the village. Everybody's convinced. They run off and do the things they need to do, and nothing happens. And so again and again, he keeps making these amazing prophecies. Everybody is compelled by what he has to say to change what they're doing, and nothing happens until someday somebody comes up to him and says, well, none of your prophecies ever come true. So how do you explain that? And he just rock and roll on his rail and say, well, that's because I'm the most successful prophet in history. If you want to find a failed prophet, just go next door to the next village and talk to Nostradamus. And, the problem with Nostradamus is that he's world famous because everybody, the few people that anticipate what he's talking about, me being one of them, over the last 4.5 centuries, are not usually heeded by the powers that be. And things happen that people go, oh, yeah, Nostradamus predicted that. But, the worst thing you can be is not a prophet who makes a mistake and it doesn't come true. But the worst is a prophet that foresees dire consequences in the future that nobody heeds.
Why is prophecy, John, always always upheaval, always chaos, always a calamity. Why doesn't prophecy say things are going to be great and this is super and you're going to have a bright future?
Well, the funny thing is, George, there is a lot of prophecy like that says that. I'm documented in my 19 books making a lot of very positive prophecies about the future. The problem's not so much in is prophecy dire, it's more in the audience. The human race that seeks to find out about the future is often fixated on the negative.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
And in a way, it's self-fulfilling. Here again, once again, the prophecy is half propagation. When I'm on your show and I make a prediction, millions of people are listening to it, and it's very possible that you have many millions of chances now for what I predict not to happen. Give a great example. When I was talking so much about the rise of Hillary Clinton as a potential presidential candidate, I know from my letters that inspired a whole lot of people to vote against her. So, the way
you changed prophecy.
Yeah, you do, especially in modern times, in our wired world and the internet revolution. Prophecy is no longer simply an art or a mystery or a skullduggery of predicting the future. It's become a way of shaping the future much more than it ever was in Nostradamus' time.
And I thought she was a slam dunk at that time.
Well, I did too, but in March of 2007, when I began writing articles about her and Barack Obama, who they were still a year out from a political, the famous political campaign, knockdown, drag out that they had in the Democrat primaries, it's on at HoagProphecy.com documented that back in 7th of March, I did an article called Hillary's Albatross. And it looked at there was just one kink in that future that might see her not achieve her destiny, and that is if she could not find a way to explain why she voted for going to war with Iraq with other senators. Mm-hmm. And in a very tight race I expected with Barack Obama, the war vote would be the deciding factor of more liberal Democrats, anti-war Democrats siding with Obama, just enough to have her lose in a very tight race with Obama. And that did happen. You see, the problem with prophecy, too, is it's very easy to get, as a person involved in prophecy, to say, this is what's going to happen. But really, the more responsible thing to say is, this is the trend. This is the potential that people at this moment are feeding the most with their actions or inactions. And there again, if you're saying it to millions of people as a voice piece for the future, you are already affecting the potential of what people in the present are going to do. They'll either increase what they're doing more or less, and in some way alter the future.
How did you end up keying in on Nostradamus as opposed to an Edgar Cayce or someone else?
Well, it's funny about Nostradamus. I was in junior high school on a lazy afternoon in science class, and I remember the first moment I ever heard that very strange name. I was dozing. It was just before we were going to see a documentary called The Crooked Cross, which opened with Nazi brown shirts and students throwing bucket loads of books into a blazing fire. And there was this fellow, the voiceover of the documentary, saying, over 400 years ago, a man named Nostradamus. And I heard that name, and it made my spine straighten, and suddenly I was wide awake. I didn't know why, even. It was my first reaction, my first impulsive reaction in my life of being involved with this strange man, which has often defined a lot of my life, at least to the public at large, was that was the strangest name I'd ever heard, and never heard of that kind of name before. And then he went on, the commentator went on to talk about how this French prophet had foreseen a man named Hister, mm-hmm. and who would have a sign of the crooked cross that would do the thing. the children of Germany, which this documentary was showing, just throwing all the great writers into the flames, the children of Germany would know no law, which is the prophecy of Nostradamus about this. And so they use that as kind of a mood setter for a look at the rise of Nazi Germany. What's intriguing later that I found out is one of the books that was being thrown, volumes of it being thrown in those fires, was Heinrich Heine's books. And he also, as a Jewish German of the 19th century, made a very interesting prophecy foreseeing Hitler. He said, the day when Germans start burning books, it will not be much longer afterwards that they will burn people.
He was right about that.
Yes. So I have a very strong passion towards history and its repetitions. I like looking at it to understand why it is that we seem to change our costumes, our religions, our points of view, but the caveman seems to be alive and well, even when he plants a flag on the moon. So I want to know why that is, because I'm one of those cavemen, and I'm also affecting the future with my own predictability. And to look at, well, then why is that? Why is every generation somehow seeded to become repeaters of the great tragedy that is history, or the great farce in some ways that is history? And that naturally led, as I exhausted looking into the past, it naturally led me towards gazing into the future history, which often looks very similar to past.
John, do you see Barack Obama deciding to use Hillary as his VP running mate?
You know, it's been a very, especially about 6 months ago, there was a lot of people writing me about this question. And no, I don't. I think there was a time there where it looked like you might see some switch of seats, that you might see the current vice president, who also wanted to be Secretary of State, switch with Hillary Clinton. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the strange thing about predictions that don't quite come out exactly as one thinks they will. There was very much a lot of discussion in my community about why I figured there was going to be this incredible team between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Once it looked like she wasn't going to win as president, I still saw her as a very powerful person in Barack Obama's life, and I naturally can assume that it would be as a vice president nominee, because as common sense often and educated guests is often, even Nostradamus admitted to that a good educated guess goes a long way in prophecy. It just seemed to me that if you were going to capture all the moderate Democrats to your side, you'd have a very powerful ticket if you picked your former adversary as vice president. And even though that didn't happen, I could not shake this feeling from my own oracular work that there's going to be something happening. And even to Hillary Clinton's great surprise, because she was completely floored by the offer, in a way, she became that person that I had foreseen, but not as a vice president. That's where my projections got in the way, and a lot of other people. But as a Secretary of State, she's now the most popular public servant in the United States. Her polls are way up in the air. Of course, it's easy to be popular when you're working and serving the politicians rather than being one of them that was elected or potentially unelected. But I don't see her switching her job. I do, though, see her as a still having a destiny to be president of the United States, as I strangely do Al Gore.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why in 2016 that might happen, and I also think that the person that could beat Barack Obama in 2012, who's not running in 2012, is going to be running in 2016, and that's Jeb Bush.
I want to ask you about Ron Paul when we come back, John, and also about some Earth changes in just a moment. Our special guest and our third member behind the secret door, John Hogue, right here on Coast to Coast AM. His website is linked up now at coasttocoastam.com. We'll be back. Well, next hour, it's the next night, by the way, it's investigative reporter Linda Moulton Howe here on Coast to Coast AM. So make sure you're part of that program. When we come back in a moment with John Hogue, we're going to take some phone calls as he's behind the secret door. John, do you see any major earth changes on the horizon over the next year or two?
Oh, it's quite a year coming. It's such a year that in this new book on predictions for 2012, I did something I have never done before. I reviewed in a preliminary chapter all the things that led us up to this year, which I call in 2012 the year of flood and upheaval. There's going to be major floods, probably another tsunami event, mainly for the astrological reasons that we have a little mini age of Neptune coming, the god of the seas. In astrological metaphor, that means we're entering a period of time starting in February that will be with us pretty much until the year 2025-26, when you will just see the monsoons get much more powerful. The things that happened in Thailand this year will be resumed, and in Pakistan as well. The year before, 25 million people were displaced by floods, monsoon floods. This year, 9 million more were added to that group. Next year, the same thing will happen. And what I'm very concerned to say is a pattern that's happening with climate change that will see nations pounded so much, like the Philippines, Thailand, which I also said would be pounded, and Eastern India, which I said would be pounded this year. You will see nations that succumb to natural disasters in the next 5 years, where they collapse because of the assault of the weather. The other thing that's very disconcerting, and it's really something I must talk about in the hopes that by saying it I'm not going to do only frighten you, but to galvanize all of you to realize that we are 5 years at the most away from a serious climate shift that is coming because rather than the global situation with the economy actually lowering greenhouse gas emissions that pumped into the air, creating a aggregate rise in the Earth's temperatures, but that we are right now around 390, I believe, parts per million of pollution, CO2, carbon emissions in the atmosphere. When we reach the critical mass of 450 parts per million, which is expected at current rates of global warming consumption of gas that we're expelling, because even though economies may actually be threatened with double-dip recession in Europe and even in this country next year around the summer, you are going to see, because of Asia, an increase in use of fossil fuels that will, by 2017, basically eat up all the budget we have, if you will, of how much carbon we can put into the atmosphere before we actually cross a line where we cannot go back to a more moderate climate. We're going to have to think about how we're going to keep our civilization going in a cascading warming effect that will bring, by the end of this century, a climate similar to what happened in the Mesozoic era with the dinosaurs.
Well, that's going to happen. You can feel it coming now, John, can't you?
Well, even here up in the Pacific Northwest, we're kind of on the nice end of the stick of a very strange climate phenomenon. We are in drought, absolute drought. The rainy Seattle world is completely dry, and there's very little weather. It's very still here. And so it's since I have a lot of readers, HogueProphecy.com, commenters all over the world, many of my readers have been right in the forefront of a lot of the disasters that are happening. Some of my readers actually weathered the Alabama tornadoes that hit northern Alabama last year, the E5s and E4s that hit through Huntsville and Harvest and other towns. So I'm getting reports from people on the ground, and unanimously everyone has been saying, to the point where the mainstream news no longer poo-poos it since last year, start really talking about the new normal, they call it. I would rather call it the new abnormal. And that if by 2027, and here's the situation, you have the Kyoto Accords running out in the end of 2012. There is talk about a new accord, a new climate change binding law agreement of the G20 and others, but the projections are that they want to only talk about it until the year 2018 and maybe initiate some of those rules by 2020. But science is beginning to say in climatology that we've got between now and 2017 before we max out on how much carbon we can put into the atmosphere before it starts triggering things that, in my 30 years of studying Nostradamus, sound like the very things that he was foreseeing back in the 1550s. Rise of the ocean. He said that the ocean would go all the way to Paris. And if you look at rising ocean level possibilities, there would be a flood of the ocean up the Seine River all the way to Paris. He's talking about a great drought that would be lingering like with the sun as a fire in the sky over the 48th latitude of the world, where all the major grain belts are, in Russia. In a way, some of that's already happened. In what you're seeing in Texas and Oklahoma, after 2010, that was the new Russian drought right there. And it's as the surrounding coastlines of the world become more inundated with water, there is going to be greater droughts in the central parts of all continents. And, you know, this greenhouse theory was not new to Nostradamus. So I'm seeing, as a scholar of that, we are coming very close now to what I have been saying on your show, the world war that is really being waged is not human against human, but Mother Nature against human stupidity.
So true. John, let's take some calls here in the waning moments that we've got. Let's go to Kennewick, Washington. AC, you're on with John Hogue. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. John, I'm a psychic. In fact, I'm a blind psychic, so it makes it real difficult. I see major changes in the next 12 years that will wipe out half of the life on the planet.
That's pretty drastic. What kind of changes, AC, do you see?
Mainly, Mother Earth is rebelling against all of these earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, and such. And also the chemtrails is altering the weather all over the world from the chemicals in those, and that's what's causing the drought in different areas. And I was wondering, Mr. Hogue or Dr. Hogue, about Hitler. Do you know whether he survived and got out of Germany at the close of the war, or whether he committed suicide? I wondered if you got any psychic feelings on that.
Hitler was definitely, I would just simply say Hitler was definitely killed himself at the end of World War II. And that there's a lot of very interesting evidence that, including some of his remains, that when the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union, as it collapsed, divulged a lot of solid evidence that show that what was left of their bodies that were burned outside the Reich Chancellery building was the Fuhrer bunker, were actually buried in Madlenberg, outside of Berlin, and then some. So yes, he is dead, but it's a very important lesson of Adolf Hitler that's perhaps the last lesson that hasn't been learned from the tragedy of his life for all of us, is that Hitler was a very good prophet. He kind of went against the popular wisdom of those of us who think that prophecy is a gift of God and therefore only good people should be using it. But this gift is dispensed quite liberally to all kinds of people by existence, and even evil people sometimes have very powerful and accurate predictions, especially if they train upon the things that evil is always best at doing, like seeing the weakness behind underpinning all democratic movements and hopes of people. And there was never a more brilliant underminer of democracy than Adolf Hitler. He saw for our future a coming of another Hitlerian phenomenon after he died, and it would be coming about between now and the 2040s, that would be more religiously based than politically based. That if somebody like him were to return, it would be almost like a religious movement. And when I look at how politics, left, right, or center, is becoming more and more the arena of the irrational and the ideological. The ideological is what I often call it, where you want to project your idea of the world politically and religiously on the world, and to the point of being in disharmony with the world. This is the kind of things that you're going to see arise in the astrology looking at the year 2012. We're in a period of cycle of history that's there are feminine and masculine energy cycles. They last 36 years each. We since 2008 have been in the cosmic night cycle, the great year, which is a time it takes the vernal equinox position of the sun to slowly creep through all 12 signs of the zodiac. It's about 25,900 some years. And this is where we get the idea of the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius. These are months in the cosmic year that last about 2,160 years. And we basically, in 2008, the scales of the future destiny tilted towards the Aquarian age. It won't be fully the Aquarian age for another 150 years or so, but now the past has less power to influence us than the potential goods and evils of the future. And with that in mind, a classic example of that is the motto, the demagoguery that has come up since 2008 in political discourse. You have the slogans that seem to really not say anything, but they are very inspiring, like, yes, we can, take back America, 99% versus 100%. These are always the signs of when you're in a cosmic night cycle. Last time we were in the one started in 1936 when people were talking about slogans called Happy Days Are Here Again, the New Deal, Deutschland erwache, Germany awake. And these are the times when history is tilted a little more into the favor of the hysteric in us. Of course, individuals can transform this energy and embrace the feminine archetypes of compassion, love, and patience and understanding. But that's usually the dominion of the individual. One of the secrets to being pretty good at predicting the future is understanding something that's just a mere fact, not something cynical, but a mere fact, is that masses of people do not have a certain gravity of unconsciousness, that an individual thinking person could be carried off in a mass of people. And so mass crowd phenomenons, which are very common in the Aquarian age, which we've entered, are really in play now. And right now, between now, since 2008, and unto 2044, we are in the cosmic night cycle, which means they're more influenced by the irrational.
Okay, next up, Carl in Menasha, Wisconsin. Carl, go ahead.
Hi. I heard your prediction about Obama and Hillary Clinton. I came up with one of my own.
All right.
I believe that Obama will lose next year, and because he is the Antichrist, he will be so pissed off that he will declare himself Supreme Ruler of the United States on December 21st.
Well, we'll see.
Well, an important thing to know about Antichrist, one of the most famous being the ones that Nostradamus foresaw, one called Hister, which is the ancient name of the river Danube, where a certain Adolf Hitler grew up. One of the reasons, it's been theorized that one of the reasons why, whether he was Antichrist or not, the dictator of Germany could be a dictator of Germany is that dictators have to be very careful also in their politics, that there are enough people that support what they're doing, that they can stay in power. And to that point, one of the most interesting things that probably lost the war for Adolf Hitler was he was so terrified of actually putting the German people on a full war footing because of the political undermining it would do to his dictatorship. He actually was taking industries off the military production when he was invading the Soviet Union, at a time when he really needed the entire country to be producing enough tanks to beat the Soviet Union. And that Germany, deep into the war, early 1943 was when they began to have a total war economy, which was about 2 years too late to win it. So the reason being is that even a dictator is looking over his shoulder. And so I can't imagine anyone who would run for president or who is president right now who would find himself in the White House after making such a declaration. He might find himself in Bellevue psychiatric ward in New York City. So where all the other Napoleons and Hitlers are.
Yeah.
Now, the Carl does bring up an interesting debate in Nostradamia, which needs to be addressed, and even I've addressed the whole chapter to it in a book I did on Nostradamus' Antichrist. It's called Nostradamus and the Antichrist, codenamed Mabus. And it is, as a scholar, I have to admit that even though I don't personally think Barack Obama is any Antichrist, his name does translate into, using anagram codes, to Mabus. But then so did George W. Bush, and so does Osama bin Laden, and so does Saddam Hussein. So
they're all thrown in together.
Yeah, and what's strange is they all were, by destiny, thrown together. And I don't rule out the possibility that Nostradamus was confused. I mean, there's this thing that goes on. There's two kinds of thinking with Nostradamus, and both are very extreme and probably off the truth about the man. I mean, you have the professional skeptics who can't see him doing anything right and make a good living doing that. And then you have other people who are equally blind to any fault that Nostradamus might have as a human being. In fact, they even attribute 2012 to him and all kinds of things to him as if he was some perfect prophetic god. And that's equally wrong. He's a human being with a gift, and he often saw the future like all of us see the future and the present through the filter of our own biases.
All right, John, we are out of time, my friend. I want to thank you for popping in behind the secret door, even though it took me 2.5 seconds to figure out who you were.
I'll do better next time.
You're the best, my friend. Look, we will talk to you soon.
Okay, take care, and Happy New Year, everybody.
You too. The Prophecies of John Hogue, his website, of course, will also be linked up at coasttocoastam.com. On our next Coast to Coast program, reporter Linda Moulton Howe joins us with several stories of high Strangest, and they are phenomenal stories, followed by, of course, conversations with Linda, where we will take your phone calls. And we've got a great week of programs for you. Again, we'll be live on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and New Year's Eve and New Year's Day night for you as well. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesseur, Stephanie Smith, Ross Mitchell, George Knapp, John B. Wells, Ian Punnett, and Art Bell, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe. Amazing. iPad. Apple iPads versus the Kindle Fire, or what else is out there? Do you like them?
You know, tablets are in their early phases right now, and the iPad is an amazing device. I always get concerned with devices like that when you're always going to feel 6 months down the line that you probably should have held off for another 6 months. Now, obviously you could take that forever. You got to at some point stop and buy the thing. But Apple runs a very closed shop, a very closed ecosystem. So once you buy your way into Apple, whether it's iPhone or iPad or any other similar devices that Apple controls, you're going to be kind of locked into that system. The reason I prefer myself the more open environments, whether it's Android operating system or something else, is because normally they're not as controlled. But there's no way getting around the fact that Apple has a tremendous lead in the tablet area. And just the fact that it's an iPad carries a lot of weight for buyers. So, the Kindle has come out now. That it has to be clearly one of the least expensive, I guess, really the least expensive full-featured Android tablet. The reports on it are kind of mixed right now. There's some issues about the speed. Of course, it's locked to Amazon in some significant ways. Not that you can't unlock it with if you know how to do it. There was a update that just came out, and there's conflicting reports about how that really improved things. I think the marketplace is still trying to find the right place for tablets in general, and not just the fact whether or not you have a tablet, but the size. Is it better to have a big tablet? Is it better to have a 7-inch tablet? How that's going to shake out, we just don't know yet. But tablets are in our future. That's for sure.
What's new in terms of technology that just knocks your socks off, Lauren? Anything?
Well, there's always there's always new things happening. I think what we're going to be seeing in the next year, for example, that's going to be extraordinary is this continuing march of acceleration of the power of smartphones in particular. We're going to be seeing quad-core smartphones commonly, and quad-core other devices also. And that just means a lot more power, a lot more processing power. I think there's going to be battery improvements. There really have to be. That's a really important area right now. But the things that we're going to be able to do with these more powerful portable devices, in conjunction with higher speed wireless networks, with the LTE networks and the other fourth generation wireless networks, are just beyond really what we can imagine right now, because we just haven't ever experienced that kind of power in something you can hold in your hand. So I think, in general, wireless and portable devices are going to be just a spectacular area of change that we're going to see in this coming year.
And Lauren, you're right about the batteries. If you don't have a real heavy-duty battery in your smartphone, that thing eats up the
if not more, individual patents that encumber that product. And so what you have is these wars between all these different companies that are trying to essentially squeeze money out of each other on one hand, or trying to get patents protectively to protect themselves from having people trying to squeeze money out of them. And I have charts that show all the different companies with different colored lines pointing at how they're trying to sue each other, and it's just like a colored blob. So this is what you're hearing now about this latest Apple patent is just another chapter in that. Basically, Microsoft is trying to find a way to squeeze. Microsoft is having problems, right?
That's right.
It was just announced today that they're not going to be doing a keynote at the CES, which they've typically done, and there's a lot of arguing. Where did they pull out? Were they kicked out? It's not clear yet. But they have their Windows Phone, and compared with the iPhone and with Android, it's really not doing very well at this point. So what they're trying to do, what Microsoft is trying to do, is find a way to get money out of the more successful phones. And one of the ways they're doing that is patent wars, especially against Android now, because there's no love lost between Microsoft and Google at this point. And so this is one of those patents. It's one of these patents where Microsoft is saying, we want a certain amount of money for every Android phone that's sold. Now, the really interesting thing about this particular patent is, in Europe, the European regulators declared you couldn't even have the patent there because they declared it was an obvious thing. It was too obvious to be patented. But here in the U.S., hey, you can do a laser pointer with a cat, so you can pretty much patent anything.
That is amazing.
To protect themselves from the things that can go wrong.
I want to ask you in a minute about the iPad and the Amazon, the Kindle Fire, and things like that. But what's this story where Apple won a patent right against HTC and Android?
Yeah, I mean,
what is that?
If you get me started on patents, George, I mean, it's going to take 5 hours here.
Okay.
What's happened is that the patent system in this country in particular has gone completely wacko. And ever since the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the U.S. PTO, started allowing business method patents and patents on basic practices and processes and software systems and such, all kinds of obvious things have been patented. Now the classic example, this isn't really a high-tech one, but the classic example is that there is actually a patent on the process of using a laser pointer to play with your cat. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like, something from a parody or something like that. It's true. You can look it up. I don't have the patent number right here, but it's there. It shows, the cat, a pointer, and the whole thing. That's patented. That was approved.
That's crazy.
So what we have now, the problem we have now in technology is that there are so many patents on so many basic processes using one click to do something, seeing a link and using it to connect to this kind of site. So if you take a modern product like a smartphone, whether it's an iPhone or an Android phone, whatever, there are tens of thousands.
Power fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, some of the really interesting areas of research now in technology are trying to find ways to reduce the parts to reduce the power consumption for the parts of cell phones that tend to draw the most power, and one of those is usually the display, the backlight and the display. The backlight's a real power-hungry thing, so they're trying to find ways, and they have these now. These haven't really hit the market yet. More displays that are more. Have you seen? The normal Kindles have the e-ink displays.
Okay.
Right, they have those monochrome.
Yeah, I haven't used it, but
yeah, and those are a completely different kind of technology from LCD because when they're fixed in position, when they're not changing, they're not really pulling any power to speak of. So they're trying to find ways to get that kind of power sipping technology or displays that don't need backlights. Like those black and white Kindles, but that could display full color, full motion, all those kinds of things. And that's coming. There's some that are flexible too. So you could theoretically take your smartphone, well, at least the display, and roll it up. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that.
I've got a charger in my office studio, a charger in my home, a charger in my car, a portable charger I take when I'm on traveling, and then I've got a little battery-powered charger that you can use for like an hour's worth of phone time that you just plug into the phone, so it's always ready. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's something. That's a real good thing to have too. I think I have one of those the same thing you're talking about. It's actually a little external battery, and you turn it on
and just plug it in,
and
plug
it
into the phone,
and it provides external